We are back on the air in this new year with new concerns over COVID and new questions about the explosion of the Omicron variant, with the FDA now letting more teens get more access to boosters. But we're still waiting on the CDC to maybe clarify those testing and isolation rules if you do get COVID. And listen, yes, this whole pandemic world can be confusing, but we're here to help you navigate through it with our experts coming up to talk about what's really concerning and what's really not. Plus, it's not just COVID, but all the snow here in the Northeast, making it a nightmare for people trying to get home after the holidays. We'll take you live to one of the harder hit spots, and the snow in Colorado also making it harder for rescuers to find two people after a huge wildfire in suburban Denver. We'll talk about what families are telling our team on the ground. Plus, in just a few days from now, Democratic leaders in D.C. will pause to mark 1 year since the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Hundreds of people have faced charges, but what about the thousands who went home after the insurrection? Our Ben Collins will give us the backstory on how the big lie's gone local. And Antonio Brown, what is up? Taking off his shirt, throwing it into the stands, walking off the field in the middle of a Tampa Bay game. He's been given more chances than Tom Brady has Super Bowl rings. What his coach is saying today about whether he deserves another one. Hey, I'm Hallie. Happy New Year, and I hope yours is so far, unless, of course, you are totally stressed out or totally over this pandemic, or both. Case numbers are at record highs, and you probably know somebody who's tested positive in the last couple weeks. You probably know more than one person who's tested positive in the last couple weeks. But those big numbers really only tell a little part of the story, because to a lot of people, it seems like this is just confusing. How long to quarantine? When to get tested? How do I even find a test? And then a big part of this for so many families is what to do about school as districts figure out how to teach our kids and how to keep our kids safe. We did get closer to a new weapon today in the fight against the virus, with the FDA approved expanding boosters for 12 to 15-year-olds. The CDC now has to sign off. We've got a whole team here to talk you through where we're at and where we're going. Meg Terrell is here to talk predictions for this surge. Dr. John TORRES is going to break down some of those quarantine guidelines. But we start with Megan Fitzgerald in Chicago, where some new vaccine requirements are being put in place. And Megan, you know, you and I have talked about this. Chicago does feel like this microcosm for what's happening nationally, right? With vaccine mandates in place, questions about schools, questions about what you do with kids, dealing with this surge and trying to figure out what the best policy is.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. And today, you're seeing Chicago and Philadelphia following the lead of big cities like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New Orleans, who have implemented these vaccine mandates. And so a lot to know, a lot to understand. I'll start here in Chicago, where they're calling for kids 5 years and older, people 5 years and older, to show proof of vaccination to be able to enter these establishments, these bars, these restaurants, these bowling alleys. And what that looks like is you have to either have the tangible copy of the vaccination card, a picture of it, or a digital copy. And then if you're 16 years of age or older, that needs to be accompanied by a photo ID. Now, in Philadelphia, for example, a bit different. There, it's more of like a phased-in process where people have until January 17th to be fully vaccinated. In the meantime, they can show a negative COVID test. And then kids between the ages of 5 and 11, they can enter right now with one shot until February 3rd. So many numbers, so much going on. But the bottom line is you're hearing these cities say, look, we are trying to control the spread of this virus. And we think the best way to do that, they say, is by making sure that people are vaccinated. Hallie? You
talk about that, Megan, but what goes hand in hand with those new vaccine mandates are the inevitable, vaccine mandate backlash from businesses who are saying, hey, this handcuffs us again nearly 2 years into this pandemic, and we need some relief.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we've talked to business owners who say, look, this puts the burden once again on us. They're saying that they have to sort of police these mandates. They now have to hire staff. That can't just be anybody. It's more of like a security person, they say, that needs to be asking for vaccination cards, because they are bracing for what could be some contentious situations with the public. And then, of course, there's the concern of possibly alienating clients and customers when they so desperately need them. I want you to listen to what one business owner had to say.
Like everything else, we had to pivot, we had to scramble, we had to incur a little bit extra cost, but we recognize that this is something that needs to be done, getting people vaccinated, and we want to do everything we can to keep our staff and our customers safe.
Yeah, so the city of Chicago says that they are going to be enforcing this mandate, and anyone who is caught violating will receive a penalty, a fine, or even have to be closed for a day, Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald live for us there in Chicago. Megan, thank you. I want to bring in senior health and science reporter Meg Terrell, who's joining us now. So, Meg, listen, you look at these numbers, right? They're getting a lot of attention. 55 million confirmed cases of COVID in this country. But you have Dr. Anthony Fauci, who says, don't look at that number necessarily, right? Look at hospitalizations, because that is what tells the story, and that is what we should be focused on. So when you're looking at some of these new forecast models, Meg, what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, so in some ways, the forecast models and looking at what's happened in other countries like South Africa is actually pretty reassuring. When we see these eye-popping numbers like 400,000 average daily cases, that's nuts. But the modeling, at least from the academic perspective, sees hospitalizations going up at a much slower rate. And that's actually what we're seeing in the numbers right now. Looking forward, one model looks to see hospitalizations, because cases are going to be so high, they could actually get as high as they got last winter, and that could cause a lot of stress on the system, and already is. But if you look to South Africa and specifically at deaths, whereas you saw a gigantic case spike there, deaths really have not gone up nearly as much, and the academic models for what's going to happen here in the U.S. suggest that as well. So while we are in for a crazy month and there is going to be strain on the healthcare system, there is at least a little silver lining that this does look to be milder, and folks should have better outcomes.
I so appreciate what you're talking about there, because yes, silver lining, that is something we should be, looking to in a hopeful note. But also the strain on the hospital system, right? The strain on the healthcare system is very real. It's what doctors keep on emphasizing here, that even if you don't have COVID, if hospitals are jam-packed treating some of these patients, that is going to become problematic in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've all seen warnings, and this is really scary, like drive really carefully right now, because hospitals are already overwhelmed and we don't need to add anything to that pile. One other thing we've been hearing a lot about has been rising hospitalizations in children, and that's something that we're paying close attention to. There have been some warnings that what will this variant look like for little kids who can't yet get vaccinated? So that's something I think experts are paying very close attention to right now.
There's also this question about these CDC guidelines that may or may not be coming out potentially, relatively any minute or sometime in the next few days, that Dr. Fauci has alluded to, basically saying that he expects the CDC to clarify, if you will, some of what you need to do if you do get a breakthrough infection, if you do test positive and are looking to go back to work after 5 days of isolation rather than 10, and maybe adding a new testing requirement. I know you know the CDC very well. You're very well sourced. What are you hearing on that front, Meg?
Well, there's been a ton of controversy over that guidance, which essentially allowed you to leave isolation if you didn't have symptoms or if they were resolving after 5 days. A lot of folks said we need to be testing at that point. But I've spoken to a lot of people who, yes, believe that what Dr. Fauci said is true, that the CDC might come out and change this due to the pushback it's received, but that also the original guidelines made sense in that it's really difficult to get tests right now, to actually be able to test out of that 5-day isolation period. And that also, we can't necessarily trust the test results then at that very moment to say, okay, we don't have COVID. Yes, the tests are helpful, but are they perfect? No, not necessarily. And so a lot of the experts I've talked to actually think the CDC guidelines made sense, but we might see a change anyway due to the pushback.
Meg Terrell, thank you very much for that. I want to bring in our NBC senior medical correspondent, Dr. John TORRES, here now. So, John, Dr. John, let me pick up on that. Should the CDC clarify those testing and isolation guidelines?
Yeah, I think the CDC needs to clarify a lot of things about the guidelines they put out there, for the simple reason that they've made it extremely confusing, and I think people don't really have a good understanding of what they need to do. But as far as the testing itself, the experts I talk to, for the most part, say if we could add testing in there, meaning that we have the testing available, that would give us a lot more assurances that the people that are leaving isolation or quarantining and going out there in the public are better protected, don't have less a chance of having COVID and spreading it to others, even though the guidelines do say wear a mask for the next 5 days. We know that not everybody does that. So that testing part could be important, but making sure that we have the tests are an important link to get to that testing point.
Just to get into the making of the sausage of the news business a little bit, Dr. John, when we're talking about something like Omicron every single night, you're often looking for, okay, what is today's headline? What is like the big news coming out of today? And today it seems to be this FDA approval of boosters for kids ages 12 to 15. Not a done deal yet, but significant, right? Because that's a third shot to boost the immune systems of these kids. Talk about how important that is, especially right now.
You know, that is going to be important because all along the pandemic, we've been saying, you know, let's get vaccinated as many people as we can in all the age groups, and we've gotten it down to age 5 now. And now they're talking about boosters for, you know, 12 to 15-year-olds and above, 12 and above, and even reducing the time frame for those boosters. And I think that's going to be important because we know that these shots do wear off over time, especially when it comes to Omicron, and we know that that booster can help make sure that people not only stay out of the hospital and prevent them from dying, but also hopefully prevent them from spreading it to others as well. But we need to make sure that we get those boosters to the age groups that need them when they need them. And this is one step in that direction, Hallie, and I think it's a good step.
We talked a minute ago with Megan Fitzgerald about how Chicago feels in some ways like a microcosm of what we're seeing in the rest of the country. I would add to that Capitol Hill, which you can't tell is the building that's like 3 blocks away from me here, is also acting in that way as well, because we're just learning today that there's been a spike of people getting tested at the Capitol who are testing positive for COVID, going from about 1% to something like 13%, right? Much like we're seeing everywhere coast to coast. What's interesting is that you had the top physician there say, and we want better masks, right? So cloth masks, not going to cut it. They're asking for things like KN95s and some of those more robust masks. Do you think that is going to make a difference? Explain that piece of it. Why would somebody recommend that?
And I think it is going to make a difference because one of the things we found out about Omicron is the viral load, the amount of virus that comes out is so heavy that it can get around the masks. And what I often tell people is the cloth mask, even from day one, is mainly meant to protect other people from you, but it doesn't necessarily protect you from other people. It's even more so with Omicron. And so you want to make sure that you get the best protection. And the levels I tell people, N95, KN95, best protection if it fits well and you're willing to wear it all day long because it's not the most comfortable mask in the world. Beyond that, you drop down to the surgical mask with the cloth mask on front, and that lets the surgical mask sit on your face. And then a little bit higher risk is just a surgical mask by itself, and then the highest risk is the cloth mask. But even having the cloth mask is better than having nothing. And so just looking at what you can wear, what's available to you, it's important that you do wear something. If you can get to that N95 or KN95 level, that's the best level to get to. But again, not everybody can wear them all day long, especially children. And so we have to look at those alternatives, making sure that they are masked, Hallie, because that's the important point beyond this.
Really quickly, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this quote that's getting a lot of attention from the Surgeon General down in Florida, who says he wants to, quote, unwind the sort of testing psychology, as he put it, put in place by the Biden administration. As we look at these continued political battles, right, between the White House, between the government in Washington, and between some of these state governments who don't like, frankly, what the president is doing. I talked with one doctor today, Dr. John, who said that that line of thinking was sort of insane, in her words, that she believed that you've got to test, you've got to know where in the population this disease is. What say you?
You know, I agree because we have a toolbox I always talk about. In that toolbox are a variety of things, the antivirals, the monoclonal antibodies, the vaccines. Testing is in there as well. We need to make sure that we incorporate all those things. There's not one thing that's going to eliminate this. There's not one thing that's going to protect everybody. We need all those different tools, testing being one of them. So to say that we don't need testing or we need to roll back what testing we have, we need to push that forward because our testing right now is not even robust enough to really help us to the point we want it to. So to start talking about pulling it back, I think it gets a little confusing at this point because we need more of that, not less, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, always great to have you on. Thanks, Dr. John. I'm sure we'll talk to you again this week. Appreciate it. The TSA says this is one of the busiest travel days of the holiday season. But you know the surge in COVID cases we're talking about is not helping airlines. Add in a big winter storm, and you've got problems. And boy, do we. We're now at more than 12,000 flights that have been delayed today. Another 4,600 have been canceled, according to FlightAware.com. That's creating problems everywhere, including in Dallas, where Morgan Chesky is posted up. So, Morgan, let's talk about these flight cancellations. You've got Southwest's home base, where you're at Love Field, and they are the ignominious leader, I'm sure, as far as the cancellation of flight numbers related to other airlines. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a tough day for a lot of travelers, for a lot of airlines, Hallie. And right now, at last check, we've actually looked at Southwest Airlines. They are leading the pack, unfortunately. More than 600 cancellations today. A lot of Southwest flights right here out of Love have been impacted. And it's been kind of an interesting day because a lot of travelers have shown up here, blue sky, sunshine. They think they're going to be able to get out just fine. But this is all part of the chain reaction caused by both the Omicron variant that's happening everywhere, and then that batch of winter weather that has grounded flights in Chicago and elsewhere due to those snowy, treacherous conditions. And so right now, things are slowly getting back to normal here, but it's been a rough day for a lot of travelers here in Dallas and, of course, all across the country.
What's interesting,
Hallie?
Morgan, when you talk about airlines, you look at, for example, JetBlue, which says that it's cutting more than 1,200 flights through, I think, mid-January, right, because of these issues with staffing and everything else. What are you supposed to do? Like, if you want to book a flight, right, if you're trying to get home or whatever, you're looking ahead to a trip in January, February, what is the best plan of attack for you?
Yeah, well, certainly I had a chance to speak to travel experts with AAA, and they said that this is kind of a time where you want to ignore the old rules. They don't necessarily apply when you have this kind of a double whammy, winter weather and COVID impacting the situation. And it's for that reason he offered up this piece of advice. Take a listen.
If you are booking, don't skip that box for flight insurance anymore. Get flight insurance. If it's a big trip, get trip insurance. The days of foregoing trip insurance, those days are over.
So you have a chance to at least try to recoup some of your, dollars if your flight gets canceled. Important to know that you are entitled to a full cash refund if your flight is canceled. However, that won't necessarily help you in the immediate moment when you show up to an airport, your flight's no longer there. I spoke to one family. They had to face that exact situation, ended up having to rent a car on their own dime, drive from Florida to Iowa because the airline that they were initially booked on didn't offer rebookings as an option. Brutal drive. I think it's like 20 hours. Yep.
I'm hoping they stopped for some breaks along the way. Can I be honest, Mark, have you ever checked the travel insurance box? I've never in my life checked the flight insurance travel box.
Not once. I never have. This would be the first time if I was flying for vacation with family, I would consider it just because of how many people are impacted. And, whether or not it's an hour or, canceled altogether, every little bit impacts, the travel down the line.
Yep.
And so that's why they're telling people double, triple check your app. I've spoken to people who have shown up here just assuming everything's fine, only to finally get to where they're supposed to go and realize they got to go right back where they came from and kind of start all over again.
Morgan Chesky, live for us there in Dallas. Morgan, good to see you. Happy New Year, friend. Thank you. So one of the things that is also affecting travel, the weather, right? We know that didn't help folks at the airport in some spots today, with winter's first significant snowstorm putting more than 20 million people under weather warnings and watches across the East, at least in the East, we should say. D.C. here getting 6+ inches. This is the scene. Rather idyllic looking, right? Outside the Capitol. They're plowing some of the snow around the plaza there. Made it for a bit of a dramatic landing for President Biden on Air Force One. He was coming back to the area from a weekend in Delaware. That is like a whiteout style landing. You can see the steps waiting for the plane there. You had 1 million people losing power from Georgia to Maryland. Schools canceled, not just because of the snow, by the way, but the rain, too. That's why some classes shut down in North Carolina. The same system did some damage over the weekend in central Kentucky, where people, look at this, very dramatic footage of some flooding rescues there. I want to bring in Al Roker to talk about this. Al, good to see you. Happy New Year, my friend.
And Happy New Year to you, Hallie.
Listen, first, can I be honest? I walked to work today because my car was buried under 7 inches of snow and I didn't feel like digging it out. It's winter. It snows. That happens, right? This is not altogether shocking.
Yes. No, it's not. But when you come off of a December that is one of the warmest on records, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get a big snowstorm that happens on the weekend when people are trying to get home and you've got COVID restrictions and things like that. It just makes for some problems. So right now, the good news is this storm is a fairly quick mover. If we look at the maps right now, you can see that we do still have some winter storm warnings, winter weather alerts stretching from Nantucket all the way down into parts of eastern Virginia. So nothing all that terrible. And the system is moving. You can see we've got some snow from Nantucket, eastern Long Island, on down right along the Delmarva Peninsula. That moves off pretty quickly. That's the good news. Gets the heck out of here. But snowfall totals, as you mentioned, 6.7 at Reagan National Airport. Washington, D.C., 8.5 inches of snow. Atlantic City, almost 10 inches. Salisbury, Maryland, 3. Charlottesville, 9 inches of snow. Next big weather maker is the storm coming in from the west. That is going to be bringing heavy rain, wind for the northwest coast, snow for the Cascades, and the Rockies. That's good news. They need that snow. That's kind of like they're banking water for the warm weather months. So that's good news. But another system hits the coast with more rain, more snow, and areas of flooding possible in Oregon and Washington. And we are looking for a big cool down that's going to be coming a little bit later this week from the Midwest into the plains. And some of the models are hinting at another snowstorm Thursday into Friday for the Northeast. So all of a sudden, 2022, flipping the switch, we went from warmer to all of a sudden a lot colder and a little stormier.
You hit on something that I think is so important, Al, right, when you started talking, which is this is like flipping a switch, because 4 days ago, I was, no joke, in a T-shirt in Washington because it was 65 degrees. You talked about how this is a little bit like weather whiplash. Do you see more of this in the years to come? I'm going to ask you to put on your climate unit hat now, right, and sort of the general climate change hat. Is that part of what's at play here, or is it just a weird weather system?
No, this is what we are seeing more of. That's what climate change does. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to happen, but what it does mean is that you get the opportunity, the possibilities for these wide swings of weather, these swaths of cold and then warm, extreme storm systems that overproduce. For example, I had to raise the snowfall amounts for Washington, D.C. because this storm we had thunder snow in 5 states, stretching from Alabama all the way to Maryland. And that gives you an idea of the intensity of these storms. So, these are one of the, we're seeing this more and more. And it is the problem that all of us, you look at what happened in Colorado. The fire this past week. Wildfire season, this is really an unprecedented wildfire season, and then a foot of snow on top of that.
It's surreal.
And these are things that we just haven't been seeing. Yeah.
Al Roker, you're the best. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow morning on the Today Show. Really appreciate you being with us tonight.
All right. Take care, Hallie.
You too. You heard Al mention Colorado, right? The wildfire there. Search teams are actually still looking for 2 people missing tonight after that huge fire in suburban Denver, with people who had been evacuated today getting back to get the chance to see what little is left of their homes. And it is devastating. Watch.
I think one of the saddest things is that I lost, the generations of photos of my great-grandparents in Europe, and I lost my families. I lost their history.
The Marshall Fire burned through more than 6,000 acres, easily making it the most destructive wildfire in Colorado's history. Almost 1,000 homes and other businesses were totally destroyed between Denver and Boulder. We still don't know what caused the fire, what sparked it, but the FBI is on the case now, trying to help local teams figure that out. Gotti Schwartz joins me now live from Colorado. Gotti, I hear that woman talk about losing her family's history. Home is your safe space. Home is your safe shelter, right? And then in an instant, it's gone. And as you heard, I don't know if you heard Al Roker and I just talking about it, a wildfire destroys your home, and then to add insult to injury, Mother Nature comes and dumps a foot on the ashes.
Exactly. It is absolutely unbelievable for so many of these families, especially in the dead of winter, especially during the middle of the day. This is something that they could have never imagined happening. We just heard that heartbreak from Dawn Palak. She told me a little bit earlier that there was so many things in that home that are completely irreplaceable. For example, her late father in New York had left her quite a bit of art, this art collection after he passed, and she was proud of driving it all the way here to her forever home in Colorado, and that art collection was inside of their home. We're talking things like grand pianos. We're talking things like people's recipe books that have been passed down from generation to generation, all those little mementos that you don't really think about. And now we are starting to see people come back into devastation like this, and they are sifting through some of the rubble, and those are the things that they're thinking about. It almost looks unrecognizable to them. And Hallie, the reason why is because what you're seeing here is a very different picture than the 2-story homes that were block after block after block. Over 100 homes right here alone. All of the ones that we see down here completely destroyed. Most of those homes had basements, and so what you see is the entire 2-story home collapsing in on the basement. And in many cases, a lot of those things, like they were looking for the keys to that piano, incinerated because of the temperature. winter. Now, that fire started 4 miles away. When you think wildfire, you normally think wilderness areas, forest areas. No, that started 4 miles away, and it extended all the way here into the suburbs of Denver, something that was unfathomable just before this happened. And then again, you see fire, and then the next day you see a foot of snow. It's difficult to register.
And it makes it so much harder. You know, God, I'm looking at what's behind you there. Like if you're, you know, I've had the sort of devastating memory, I guess. I had a friend whose home burned down. I remember going with her through the, you know, the rubble, basically looking for photo albums. It's so much harder to do, you know, under 10 inches of snow. I just feel for those families because that makes it so much difficult to find their property, what's left of it, but also harder for rescuers to get out there and look for example, those 2 missing people, I would imagine.
Absolutely. It's very difficult because of the snow. You can't really tell the direction in which the origin of the fire may have gone. It's making it difficult for investigators. We also understand that there are still 2 people missing. Originally, there were 5 people missing in all of this chaos. And fortunately, 3 of those people have been located. They were found evacuated by people that took them to safety, and they were finally able to reconnect with family. But 2 people are still missing. And we know that cadaver dogs have been going through the different neighborhoods. We know in 2 of those locations, those people, their home looks very much like this. It is a complete loss, and we still do not know where those people may be because the rescue teams that are coming through here are finding a lot of hot spots. In fact, just down the way, there's an area that is still smoldering, and that makes it extremely difficult for those investigators to get in there. You see that right down there?
Yep.
Again, Hallie, remember, this is 4 or 5 days of sub-freezing temperatures. You got snow on the ground, and that is still burning. So as these investigators go through and as these recovery teams go through, they're having to sift through very carefully with hand tools, and it's making it an extremely difficult process. Hallie?
I know they're looking to see what in the world caused this thing. Gadi Schwartz, live for us there in Colorado. Gadi, thank you. Appreciate it. Coming up on the show, Israel is now the first country to roll out a 4th COVID vaccine dose. People over 60 can now get that extra shot there. Raf Sanchez has posted up in Tel Aviv for us with more on what this means for that country's fight against the pandemic and our own. Coming up. A lot of countries just started rolling out their first booster vaccines, but Israel's not one of them because today they are now in double booster territory. That's right, shot number 3 getting offered to Israelis over the age of 60 if it's been at least 4 months since their last shot. The prime minister rolled this out within just the last 24 hours or so, but the country had already started giving out 4th doses to people with weaker immune systems and some medical staff as early as last week. So once again, Israel kind of taking the lead here, offering yet another booster, first for the most vulnerable and then later for everyone else. Raf Sanchez is posted up there in Tel Aviv. And Raf, listen, it does feel like Israel has been on the sort of leading edge of the pandemic fight efforts. They had the fastest vaccine rate when it all started. They were the first country to offer boosters last summer. Now you have this. Talk about how this is playing out where you are.
So, Hallie, I think Israel has a couple structural advantages. It's a smaller country, right? Just 9 million people. There is a very modern, very sophisticated healthcare system. But I think the biggest factor here is the Israeli government has just been unbelievably aggressive in terms of procuring vaccines, in terms of getting them into people's arms. Both former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, current Prime Minister Naftali Bennett have gotten to the habit of personally working the phones with the CEOs of these vaccine companies, getting more doses into their country. I want you to take a listen to what Prime Minister Bennett said last night about Israel being a pioneer when it comes to vaccines.
Israel will once again be pioneering the global vaccination effort. We must keep our eye on the ball, act swiftly and decisively if we want to continue engaging and working with an open country as much as possible throughout this pandemic.
Hallie, I'd say one other factor here. Israelis, no stranger to emergencies, no stranger to wartime. So I do think there is a certain willingness in this country to listen to government officials, follow their instructions, follow their guidance in a way you don't always see in the U.S. Hallie?
You make such an interesting point because you're right, and that Israel almost kind of walled itself off in the early days of the pandemic. What's interesting, Raf, and what caught my attention about this idea of a 4th booster shot ties to something that came out in the New York Times this morning, this deeper dive into people in this country, right? People in the U.S. who are maybe immunocompromised, have weaker immune systems, who are sort of skirting the regulations a little to get an unapproved, unofficial fourth vaccine dose just to protect themselves. And I wonder what that says to you as somebody who's in a country where they're doing that sort of on the books, what that says about, what we might see here in this country coming up.
Yeah, so working backwards, Israel approved the third dose, the first booster, back in July last year, 2021, not that long ago. The U.S. followed suit 2 months later in September. So if that pattern holds, you might see an on-the-books, officially approved fourth vaccine dose in the U.S. 2 months' time, maybe in March. It's obviously speculative. We do know the CDC follows very closely what happens here in Israel. Sure. CDC officials spend a lot of time on the phone with their Israeli counterparts. Hallie, I will say the data justifying the fourth dose, not quite as clear-cut as it was for the third dose. That might lead to a slightly slower rollout in the U.S.
Raf Sanchez, live for us there in Tel Aviv. Raf, it's great to see you tonight. Happy New Year. Thank you for being on. This week marks 1 year since the attack on the Capitol. And while we know the House Select Committee is working to investigate the cause and what happened, there's a lot more work to be done. We're going to explain the new reporting on this after the break. While we talk about what Congress is doing to make sure another January 6th insurrection doesn't happen again, we're also taking a look at the people who literally made it an insurrection in the first place. Ben Collins has our backstory on some new NBC reporting coming up in just a second. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things, stories our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, former Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid will lie in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda next week. The ceremonies will be open only to invited guests because of COVID. Of course, it's restricted. Reid died last week at his home in Henderson, Nevada, after battling pancreatic cancer. Number 2, Brazil's president Jair Bolsonaro was rushed to the hospital earlier today after suffering what's been called an intestinal blockage. You are looking at a picture that Bolsonaro posted of himself from the hospital. He posted on Twitter and said more tests will be done for a potential surgery. Number 3, beaches in Southern California had to shut down over the holiday weekend because of a sewage spill. As many as 7 million gallons of untreated wastewater spilled into the Pacific, affecting beaches from Orange to Los Angeles counties. That's a big stretch if you know Southern California. The spill happened after a whole lot of rain overwhelmed storm drains. Number 4, France has officially banned the use of plastics to package most fruits and veggies to try to phase out single-use plastics. It's part of new regulations that the French president says will address pollution. Number 5, a very happy birthday to the world's oldest living person. Kane Tanaka celebrated her 119 years young. She's at a nursing home in Japan. She was born in 1903 and says she's hoping to live till 120. You do it. We're rooting for you. The Guinness Book of Records recognized her in March 2019 when she was 160. This week, Washington will pause and reflect to mark 1 year since the insurrection at the Capitol, with a day of remembrance planned on Thursday. And there have been changes over the last 12 months to try to make sure that something like this does not happen again. You know that there's a House Select Committee investigating the attacks. That was created last summer. Since then, they've interviewed more than 300 people. They've collected more than 35,000 pages of documents. The Capitol Police have made some improvements. They've tried to fix some of their communication and training systems. But 200 officers have either retired or left the force in the months since January 6th. That is a big number. Then today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer sent a letter to his Democratic colleagues in the Senate calling for democracy reforms, basically more voting rights changes to try to prevent January 6th ever again from happening in the future. I want to bring in Sahil Kapoor, our congressional correspondent. So Sahil, the group on the front lines of all this were the Capitol Police. You heard those numbers. Some 200 police officers left the force after January 6th. And the police chief told our own Garrett Haake they're about 400 officers short of what they need, which accounts for some shortages before January 6th, too. You hear that number, and I think to the layperson, they think, well, that ain't good. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Hallie. Well, look, the security situation has improved on Capitol Hill. They're taking more proactive steps in anticipation of events that they believe could be problematic. They are quicker to erect a fence around the Capitol grounds ahead of potentially threatening events. They're doing more to train their officers. About a year ago, nobody really thought that fighting off violent insurrectionists was going to be, what they're signing up for. Now everyone knows it could be part of the call of duty. And beyond that, they're trying harder to share information between these various agencies, between Capitol Police, D.C. Police, the FBI, so that you don't get into a situation where something horrible happens and they just end up pointing fingers and you get a bunch of recriminations.
Let's look at what the House Select Committee is doing. You've seen a number of them that have been out this past weekend. They're going to be out this week talking about the investigation and its status now. And right now, really zeroing in into what former President Trump did and did not do on the day of the insurrection. You had Liz Cheney, one of the only Republicans on this committee, saying that both Kevin McCarthy, of course, Republican leader, and Ivanka Trump, then President Trump's daughter, pleaded with him personally to try to stop the attacks while Mr. Trump watched it all unfold on TV in the dining room next to the Oval Office. Talk about the significance of this kind of information and any caveats we should take as it relates to, for example, another story about Ivanka Trump. We've heard them before through the Trump administration, sort of saying, reportedly being the one to be the voice of reason with her father.
Right. We have heard plenty of Ivanka Trump stories of that caliber. I share your skepticism, Hallie, but this is certainly relevant to the mandate of this committee on both fronts. So I think of this committee as having two specific goals here. The first is to create a full historical record of what exactly happened on the day of January 6th. This is very relevant to that. If the president's daughter, and at the time White House advisor, was insisting that he take some action to try to stop this, that's significant. If other people were doing the same, as the Select Committee says they have evidence was the case, including the former president's son, by the way, Don Jr., that's also significant. And then this also goes back to the heart of this committee's purpose, which is legislative recommendations, trying to prevent something like this from happening in the future. And that's where Liz Cheney was talking about punishments for a president who watches an insurrection unfolding on TV and doesn't take action to do anything about it. So it does go to the heart of the committee's goals here.
Sahil Kapoor, it's great reporting, and I know we're going to talk to you more this week as we lead up to that one-year anniversary of January 6th. I hope you had a great holiday. I actually know you did because, my friend, you have been engaged. Congratulations, future married man. We're thrilled for you and Emily in your future endeavors. Thanks, Sahil.
Thank you, Hallie, from Emily and from me.
Okay, talk to you soon. We're going to keep the conversation going, not about Sahil's engagement, but about the January 6th anniversary with today's backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into the bigger picture of what's happening. And as we talk about that, we're going to look at who has and who has not faced consequences. More than 725 people have been arrested in connection with the attack on the Capitol, according to the U.S. Attorney in D.C. 165 of them have pleaded guilty to various federal charges. But you've seen the videos from that day, right? There were a lot more than just a few hundred people, thousands of people. I mean, look at that. Thousands of people were at the Capitol as part of this pro-Trump riot. So what happened to all of them? According to an NBC News investigation, turns out a lot of them brought that anger they felt back home, thousands of miles away from D.C., and are trying to transfer this so-called big lie to the local level, looking to upend school boards and county health administrators to influence policy. Listen, what they're really doing is trying to take this to the grassroots level and change things from the ground up by using misinformation and disinformation to propagate the fight. It's all happening as extremist groups like the Proud Boys are resurfacing, trying to rebuild their infrastructure while changing and adapting to restrictions put in place by big tech, by social media companies. All of it is in an effort to get this big lie message out even more broadly than before. Ben Collins has been all over this story for the past year. Ben, it's good to see you and Happy New Year to you. And listen, there's a couple of different pieces of this, right? Because there's the well-organized sort of militia groups that showed up on January 6th. Then there were these kind of average Joe citizens, right? Let's talk about those Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the more organized groups. They're getting the hammer laid down on them by some of these social media moderators, right? How do you keep following them when they keep changing their message, changing their recruiting strategies, changing the platforms that they're on? How do you actually do that reporting fundamentally?
Sure. So they have backup accounts on places like Telegram, and they'll say, hey, if I get banned here, I'm going to go over to this other thing, or check out my friend's account. And the friend's account is really that same person. Really, you're just following individuals from platform to platform. And it doesn't get that complicated after that. It just takes a lot of work because they can be banned at any moment. But there are these other new places like Getter or Telegram where they're never going to be banned from there. They're actually, encouraged to be in places like Getter. So you can see them there very easily. So they'll be banned from Facebook, they'll be banned from Twitter, but they're not going to go away entirely. It's pretty easy to track them over time.
I want to quote from one of the women that you spoke with in the course of your reporting, who's part of an all-women militia group in Stockton, California. She's talking about local leaders on city council boards and says, these people live in our community, they work here, and they're going to have to face us every single day. When you're talking with folks who don't necessarily trust authority, who certainly don't trust mainstream media outlets, like the one that we are on now, how do you get them to talk to you? How do you get them to confide in you, to tell their story?
Well, people like Denise, Denise was at the Capitol on January 6th. She called it a revolution. She wants media attention. She likes the fight, really. So she'll talk to you in person and then say something else entirely when she's out there. For example, I asked her about January 6th when I met her at that rally in Stockton. And she said, I don't want to talk about that, basically. And then a couple minutes later on the bullhorn, to all the people around here, she said, the media wants me to talk about January 6th. And all the people around her laughed. Because to them, to anti-vax protesters, that's a big joke. January 6th is not a big deal to them. They think it's something funny that happened. It was just a riot. Nobody got hurt. Nobody really died in their eyes. So it's a different world. So you kind of meet them on their own terms and then let the fallout come afterwards. Usually they say stuff angrily on their social media after the fact that is a lot more interesting than what they'll say to your face.
How confrontational do you get with some of these people who will be saying to your face things that you know are not true, things that you know are lies?
Not that confrontational, to be honest with you. Usually they try to make it really personal, and that's the hard thing to step aside from, right? They will make fun of you. They'll say that, I don't trust anybody in the media and all that stuff. And that's very normal, of course. Yeah. So and if they know who I am specifically, because I've been covering this for so long. Do they say things like, oh, Ben, look at your beard? I don't know. Do they make personal appearance? I don't know how personal. I've had some conversations with people who don't like the media, and it's personal in that they say, well, NBC is terrible. I can't, it's the sort of distrust of mainstream media, but it's not personally personal. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it depends on how into QAnon they are, because if they're really into QAnon, they know who I am, and I'm in that world of, people who worship Satan or something. So, to them, it's a way to get a free shot into them, so they'll know that. But I would say most people are just generally distrustful of the media, but when they meet you face to face, they change their mind. You're a regular person. Right. We've always talked about this, Hallie, local media, that going away has really changed how the national media operates, because if you never met somebody who works at the newspaper, everybody in the media is a villain to you. So when they finally meet somebody face to face, they're like, oh, wait, you don't have horns? You're not going to yell at me or something? Right. It's a very different experience once it's in the flesh.
Ben Collins, it is so fascinating. Honestly, we could do 4 hours on the backstory with you and how you do your reporting. Great piece. I know that more of it is airing on Nightly News tonight. More of it is on NBCNews.com. More of it on NBC News Now and MSNBC too. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. Coming up
Thank you.
Here on the show, royal request rejected. Say that 5 times fast. A judge has blocked Prince Andrew's effort to stop a sexual assault lawsuit against him. So what comes next for his legal battle? And 2 teen hikers safe and sound in Oregon after quick thinking helped lead to their rescue. Wait till you see this video coming up in the local. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, New York City is starting a pilot program that will install public health vending machines to try to fight the opioid epidemic. You're probably thinking, okay, what's in the vending machine? Stuff like sterile syringes, the anti-overdose drug naloxone. The nonprofit Fund for Public Health in New York made the proposal and hopes the program will help people in underserved communities. Out west, from our West Coast Bureau, 2 hikers in Oregon made the most of what they had to get help after they got stuck camping. So look at this. They were able to flag down the Coast Guard. Do you see what they wrote in the snow? I don't know if you can tell from this shot. They literally wrote SOS in the snow so that from the sky they could be seen. They were reported missing on New Year's Eve after not coming back from a trip to a mountaintop a few days earlier. And our LA Bureau also reporting on California's New Year resolution to be more eco-friendly with a new law. Instead of throwing leftovers in the trash, people will need to compost and take it curbside. The state wants to keep food scraps out of landfills to hopefully cut down on some of the pollutants that go into the atmosphere. So if you do not have a compost jar in LA, get one. Britain's Prince Andrew may be under more scrutiny now than ever before. That's because a judge is now publicly releasing a once confidential settlement agreement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and Jeffrey Epstein. The document showed Epstein paid her $500,000 to drop a separate case of sexual abuse against Epstein back in 2009. And this all came out because Prince Andrew's lawyers claim that today's settlement shields him from a civil suit brought by Giuffre in Manhattan federal court. She accuses Prince Andrew of forcing her to have sex with him more than 2 decades ago when she was still a minor, also alleging the abuse happened at 2 of Epstein's homes, as well as the London home of Ghislaine Maxwell. Throughout this whole process, Prince Andrew had denied the allegations. He even told the BBC in a 2019 interview he had, quote, no recollection of ever meeting this lady, none whatsoever. Here to help us understand all this is NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Danny, can you please help me put this in plain English? Because I don't know if I'm doing a good enough job at this, right? Prince Andrew's lawyers say she can't sue him because she said she would end the legal action. So how does this work?
Yeah. Anytime you settle a case, as was settled in 2009 between Giuffre and Epstein, the defendant wants lots of broad language in the release document that everybody signs. And in this case, this particular release released not only Epstein, but anyone who could have been a defendant along with Epstein. And so Prince Andrew is now arguing, hey, whoa, that's me. I'm one of the people that could have been a defendant named in that suit against Epstein. Of course, the plaintiff in this case is going to argue that, no, this did not include Prince Andrew. But if a court concludes that Prince Andrew was covered by that earlier release, then Prince Andrew may get out of this lawsuit.
What are the chances that it happens, Danny? I mean, you've explained how it would happen, but is that likely? Is that a likely result?
It's hard to say. In New York, courts will enforce release language if it appears to have been entered into freely and voluntarily. And there's no indication that this release wasn't. I mean, it was signed by the parties back in 2009. The parties presumably agreed to that language. Normally, the language that I see is more about releasing claims against a particular person. You don't normally see releases against any and all potential defendants. That's a little broader than you normally see. But if Giuffre agreed to it, then it's going to be difficult to convince a judge that it shouldn't apply or be enforced.
Giuffre's lawsuit says Prince Andrew forced her to have sex when she was a minor, that it happened at Ghislaine Maxwell's home in London. We know, because we've talked about it on this show, I think, Danny, that Maxwell was just convicted of recruiting and trafficking young girls last week. How does that affect, potentially, this case against Prince Andrew?
It mostly affects the case against Prince Andrew in the sense that it unearthed a lot of discovery. And by the way, plaintiffs' attorneys, including folks like me, do this fairly often. If there's a pending criminal prosecution, you wait for the outcome to see what the government does for you in discovery in terms of unearthing evidence against the defendant. And that's probably what the plaintiffs' attorneys did here. The Maxwell case involved a lot of evidence and less witnesses than was originally anticipated, but certainly plenty enough for the plaintiffs' attorneys to mine for gold.
Just timeline-wise, Danny, we know that tomorrow morning there's going to be this key hearing, right, where this request by Prince Andrew and his team to dismiss the case will be heard. Is that it? Like, are we going to know, when will we know, like, yes or no on this?
I get amnesty for all my predictions because of all of these, the spike in Omicron and COVID, and even in the last year and a half. The courts are completely unpredictable. Arguably, once the judge hears oral argument, the judge doesn't really need a lot more in terms of people coming to the courthouse. The judge and the clerks and the attorneys who work with the judge can figure this out and write an opinion. So it really is just about how much that judge has on the docket in terms of doing research and writing memoranda. But this oral argument is probably something that is just a little bit extra for the judge. On the papers alone, the judge may have already reached or is leaning towards a decision.
Danny Cevallos, I grant you amnesty, Mr. Cevallos, on that prediction. Thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate it. Timeout for Antonio Brown officially, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers dumping the very controversial wide receiver after this bizarre stunt he pulled during a game. We'll talk about what he did and what this means for his career with the NFL coming up after the break. So if you were watching football on Sunday, you saw pretty exciting today. A lot of close games, playoff spots getting locked up, including for the Philadelphia Eagles. Not trying to brag, but they're going to the playoffs. Still, the only thing anybody can talk about is Antonio Brown, right? So roll the tape from this Bucs-Jets game at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. You've probably seen this on social media because Brown rips off his shirt. He throws it into the stand, throws his gloves into the stands. Then a couple of seconds later, he starts waving his arms in the end zone. He flashes like a peace out sign to the crowd and then jogs into the tunnel. This was in the middle of the game. We haven't heard from Brown since then. Like, that was it, except for this cryptic tweet saying super gremlin with the shaka hand emoji. That's the whole tweet, man. Guys, I'm showing you. That's the tweet. So after this Bucs game, you had head coach Bruce Arians telling reporters that Brown is, quote, no longer a Buck, although we should note as of right now, he's still on the roster. And then Brown's friend and now former, apparently, quarterback, Tom Brady, had this to say. Watch.
I think everybody should find, hopefully do what they can to help him in ways that he really needs it. I think everyone should be very compassionate and empathetic toward, some very difficult things that are happening.
I want to bring in Peter King to help break this down with us. Peter, it is great to have you back on the show. Thank you. And talk to me about Bruce Arians first, right? Because he said today he's got no regrets about signing Brown, who, as folks will know, has this long history of suspensions, other legal troubles. You actually talked with the coach. He told you he actually feels bad for Brown. Can you explain that? Why?
I think really that the one thing about Antonio Brown is he's got incredible talent. And the Bucs took a chance on that talent. He was a legitimate piece of their Super Bowl puzzle last year and was going to be a big part of their team for as long as he lasted this year. But he did it with the Steelers. He did it in Oakland. He didn't do it with New England. Other things got him out of New England. But as Arians said to me, flat out, he goes, he just can't help himself. I feel bad for him, but he can't help himself. So, right now, I think that the emphasis and the focus for Brown should be on trying to get help for what would cause him to pull such an incredibly weird and bizarre stunt on coast-to-coast television. And that empathy piece is really what you heard, and we just played it from Tom Brady, who, is so devoted to winning, wants, talented people on his team, and is here in the corner and really backing and pushing empathy for somebody who has created some off-the-field drama for Brady over the last couple of years. I mean, Tom Brady has always been very, very fond of Antonio Brown. And honestly, I think Brown to Brady is a little bit of a fanboy. Antonio Brown couldn't believe that Tom Brady wanted him on the New England Patriots in 2019. He really wanted him there. And so Antonio Brown now just loves up to Tom Brady almost at all times, and I'm sure he would right now. His relationship with Brady has not been affected, but it's just, you can't keep walking out on your teams. He did some crazy things in Pittsburgh, did crazy things in Oakland. He's just whatever the reason for it is, he's a totally unreliable person. I'd be surprised if he got another chance in the NFL. Well, more to come on that story, I think, Peter, as more of this comes out. We're so glad to have you with us to talk that through. Peter King, NBC sports columnist, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for watching this hour of Hallie Jackson Now. We'll see you right back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.